Adorama TV presents Digital Photography One-on-One, where we answer your questions. Here's your host, Mark Wallace.
Welcome back to another episode of Adorama TV. You're watching Digital Photography One-on-One. Well, this week we have a great question from Travis Hawkins. Travis wrote in and he said, I want to start shooting action photos. I can't seem to figure out how to get things like bikes, runners, and cars to look like they're moving fast. Do you have any tips? Well, that's a great question, Travis, and there's a technique that you can use, and it's called panning. It's where you use a slower shutter speed and you move the camera a little bit while following a moving target, and you get a background that's blurred, but the subject remains nice and crisp. Well, to demonstrate this, we took a little field trip to the park, so let's have a look at that. Hey, we're in downtown Phoenix, Arizona at Encanto Park, right out here with all the birds and the trees, and it's a beautiful day. We're going to talk to you about the basics of panning. Now, the thing that's critical is panning is when you're shooting a moving subject and you're keeping your camera and the subject in sync. So as you're shooting, you're following and things are just perfectly in sync, so the subject stays in focus, it's nice and clear, but the background is blurred. Now, you can see this for yourself by doing a really crazy, simple exercise, and that is to take your finger, put it in front of your face, close one eye, and then just focus on that finger, move your head back and forth, and you can see that your finger is nice and clear, but the background is blurry. In fact, it becomes more pronounced if you just move your finger a little bit closer to your head and move your head back and forth. And that's what panning is. You want to keep your camera and your subject in perfect synchronization and then shoot that way. Now, there are some things that you need to do to make panning look terrific. The first is you want to make sure you have a nice long lens. Now, this guy is a 200mm lens, which is about what I like to shoot when I'm panning. The second thing is you want to make sure that you keep your subject nice and full in the frame. So you don't want the subject to be really far away or too close. You want to just fill the frame with your subject. And then third, and this is critical, you need to make sure that you're shooting something that's moving left to right or right to left. If you're shooting something that's coming straight at you or moving straight away, well, the panning is not going to work because the background is not going to be blurred. So make sure you're shooting something left to right with a long lens, center it, and when you do, you're going to get a great panning shot. Now, there are a few things, 6 to be exact, that aren't so obvious to get perfect panning shots, so I'm going to walk you through those. And number 1 and number 2 go hand in hand. Number 1 is you want to make sure that you shoot in shutter priority mode because you need to control the shutter when you're doing panning. And that leads to number 2, which is really the shutter needs to be slower, not faster. And I know that sounds sort of wacky because normally when you're shooting moving objects, you want to speed up the shutter to freeze the action. But what we're trying to do is to show motion, so your shutter speed needs to slow down. Now, I normally start at about a 30th of a second or a 15th of a second when I'm shooting something, but there's a catch. If you're shooting something like a race car, well, it's moving really, really fast. And so, well, your shutter speed is going to need to be faster. But if you're shooting something like a kid on a bicycle, that's going to be a little slower. So your shutter speed needs to be slower. Now, there's a rule of thumb. If everything is blurry, well, then you need to speed up your shutter speed. But if nothing is blurry, well, you need to slow down your shutter speed. For a good starting point, start at about 30th of a second or 15th of a second, and then work up or down from there. Number 3 is your autofocus mode. It needs to be on continuous focus mode, or if you're shooting with a Canon camera, AI servo mode. And what that does is it allows your autofocus to continually focus. Now, that's critical because your subject and your camera are constantly moving in relationship to each other. So if you had it on single focus mode or one-shot mode, what would happen is your camera would focus, it would lock that focus, and as your subject moved, well, it would be out of focus by the time you got the picture. So you need to be on continuous or AI servo mode. So number 4 goes right with that, and that is you need to use the center autofocus point. Now, the center autofocus point is key for a few reasons. Number 1, it's the fastest autofocus point in your camera, so it'll make sure that you get nice, clear, crisp pictures. Number 2, you can use it as a target to track your subject. Now remember, it's key that your subject and your camera move in perfect synchronization. So when those get out of sync, well, the panning is not going to work. So you put that center autofocus point on your subject and you track that perfectly. Now make sure you do that like a good golfer. You follow through. So as you're shooting, you just follow that all the way through the shot, and the center autofocus point is going to help you do that. And also, it's the thing that's going to help you fill the frame with your subject. So you've got that nice target, you can fill the frame, and you can track your subject all the way through. Well, that brings us to number 5, and that is that you want to shoot with your subject directly in front of you. Now, if you only take one picture, right, you're tracking your subject and boom, you take a shot right there, well, the chances of getting it just right are pretty slim. So that's why we have number 6, and that is to set your camera in continuous drive mode. Now normally when you take a shot, you hold down the shutter, you get one shot. But in continuous drive mode, you get a bunch of shots. And so what happens is you're going to shoot this sort of like a golfer. You're going to have a nice good golf swing and you're going to follow through. So stick that center autofocus point on your subject, you're going to follow it through, trying to get it right there directly in front of you. So you're starting over here and you should get that shot right there. And if you do, you're going to have a perfect panning shot. Well, those pictures are pretty cool, and that about wraps it up for this episode of Digital Photography One-on-One. Now remember, if you want to see the still shots from this episode, look at some links that take you to the gear that we used in this episode, or even some additional topics about panning, you can see all that stuff at the Adorama Learning Center. And if you have a question about digital photography or videography, you can send me those questions to askmark@adorama.com, and I might use it in a future episode. Well, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.
This episode is brought to you by Adorama TV. Visit the Adorama Learning Center where you'll find photography tips and techniques, links to the gear used in this episode, and related videos. For all the latest photography, video, and computer gear, visit adorama.com. And the next time you're in New York City, visit our store located on 18th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue.